The secret of ancient maps. Were entire continents erased? Have you ever stopped to think that everything we've learned about the geography of our planet might be incomplete? What if I told you that ancient maps, created hundreds of years ago, show continents and territories that have simply disappeared from modern records? We're not talking about small islands or navigational errors. We're talking about immense land masses, documented by respected cartographers, that have vanished without a trace in current map versions. This is one of the great questions that intrigues researchers, historians, and curious minds around the world. Are these maps evidence of lost knowledge, of advanced civilizations that knew of regions whose existence we now deny, or simply misinterpretations by past explorers? The truth is that when we delve into the study of ancient cartography, we find fascinating inconsistencies that challenge our understanding of history. Maps like the Piri Reis map, created in 1513, showed details of the Antarctic coast that were only rediscovered in the 20th century, when the continent was covered in ice thousands of years ago. How is that possible? Other documents show gigantic islands in the middle of the Atlantic, continents in the Pacific, and coastal configurations that don't correspond to what we know today. These mysteries invite us to question, are we looking at vestiges of a history that was deliberately erased or rewritten, or are they just cartographic fantasies from a time when global exploration was still in its infancy? Prepare for a journey through the most intriguing secrets of ancient cartography, where we will explore theories, evidence, and mysteries that could completely change your view of the world we live in. Maps that challenge official history. The history of cartography is full of documents that simply don't make sense when compared to our current knowledge. One of the most striking examples is the Piri Reis map, created by an Ottoman admiral in 1513. This map shows not only the east coast of South America with surprising accuracy, but also details of Antarctica that technically shouldn't have been known at that time. The most intriguing part is that the map appears to show the Antarctic coast without ice, something scientists say hasn't happened for at least 6,000 years. How would a 16th century cartographer have access to this kind of information? Piri Reis claimed to have based his work on older maps, some dating back to the time of Alexander the Great. This suggests that there may have been a much older and more sophisticated tradition of geographical knowledge than we imagine. Another fascinating case is the Orientaeus Finnaeus map of 1531, which also shows Antarctica with impressive geographical detail, including rivers and mountain ranges that were only discovered in the 20th century using ice-penetrating radar technology. The accuracy of these maps raises profound questions about who actually mapped these regions and when. Some researchers suggest that these documents are copies of even older maps, possibly from prehistoric civilizations that possessed advanced nautical knowledge. Others argue that these representations are coincidences or creative interpretations of limited information. The fact is that these maps exist, are documented in museums around the world, and continue to generate heated debates in the scientific community. If you're finding this information intriguing, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any content about fascinating mysteries and discoveries. Oh, and click the Hypar button to support the channel and help us bring you even more amazing content. Your help makes all the difference in continuing this journey together, exploring the greatest enigmas of history, a mysterious Terra Australis Incognita. For centuries, European cartographers included a gigantic continent in the southern hemisphere, called Terra Australis Incognita, the unknown southern land, on their maps. This continental mass appeared on virtually every world map of the 15th, 16th, and 17th centuries, occupying a much larger area than the Antarctica we know today. The theory behind this inclusion was based on the idea of balance. Thinkers believed that a large landmass in the south should exist to counterbalance the lands of the northern hemisphere. But where did this strong certainty about the existence of this continent come from? Some maps showed specific geographical details, rivers, mountains, and even possible settlements, suggesting that it was not just theoretical speculation. When explorers finally began to navigate these waters in the 18th and 19th centuries, they discovered that Terra Australis Incognita did not exist as it was represented. Antarctica was much smaller, and there was no temperate supercontinent in the south. But this raises an intriguing question. Why did so many cartographers, for so long, insist on including this phantom continent? Were these maps based on ancient knowledge from a time when the configuration of the land was different? Or did they represent the hopes and theories of explorers who never managed to verify their assumptions? Most fascinating is that some of these maps showed connections between Terra Australis and other landmasses, as if there were known routes to get there. Historians debate whether this could indicate undocumented ancient voyages, or if it was simply creative filling in of unknown spaces. The mystery of Terra Australis reminds us that the history of human exploration may have lost chapters that we will never fully recover. Ghost Islands of the Atlantic. The Atlantic Ocean is full of stories about islands that appeared on old maps but were never found in modern explorations. One of the most famous is Ilha Brasil, also known as High Brasil, which appeared on medieval maps west of Ireland. This mysterious island was represented on maps for over 500 years, always with distinct characteristics: circular, divided by a river, and shrouded in perpetual fog. Sailors reported occasional sightings, but expeditions organized to find it always failed. Eventually, the island was removed from official maps in the 19th century, classified as a legend. But why did so many respectable cartographers include it for so long? Another famous phantom island is Antillia, also called the Island of the Seven Cities, which supposedly was located somewhere in the central Atlantic. According to legend, 7 bishops fled the Iberian Peninsula during the Moorish invasion in the 8th century and established 7 cities on this paradisiacal island. Maps from the 15th and 16th centuries depicted Antillia in impressive detail, including the location of supposed cities. Christopher Columbus was familiar with these maps, and some historians believe he may have thought he had found these legendary islands when he arrived in the Caribbean. St. Brendan's Island is another fascinating example, named after an Irish saint who supposedly sailed the Atlantic in the 6th century. This island appeared and disappeared from maps throughout the centuries, always located in different positions. These phantom islands could be navigational errors, mirages, or even sightings of icebergs or temporary sandbanks. But it's also possible that some were real islands that existed at some point, but were submerged by geological changes or rising sea levels. What's fascinating is that many of these islands were described with specific details about vegetation, animals, and even inhabitants, suggesting that someone actually visited them at some point in history. The enigma of Portolan maps. Portolan charts are medieval cartographic documents that display a surprising level of accuracy, especially considering the technology available at the time. Created primarily between the 13th and 16th centuries, these maps were used by navigators and show the Mediterranean and adjacent coastal areas in impressive detail. What intrigues researchers is that many of these maps appear to be based on projection and measurement systems that theoretically did not exist at that time. The accuracy of latitudes and longitudes in some Portolan's rivals maps created centuries later, when far more sophisticated navigational instruments were available. How is this possible? Some scholars suggest that Portolans were copied from even older maps, possibly of Roman or even Phoenician origin, when advanced maritime civilizations dominated the Mediterranean. The Dulcet map of 1339 is a perfect example of this inexplicable accuracy. It shows the Mediterranean with an accuracy that would only be equaled in the 18th century, including details of depth, currents, and coastal features that required sophisticated nautical knowledge. Another fascinating aspect of Portolan charts is the presence of complex rhumb lines, geometric networks that covered the entire map and supposedly aided navigation. Some researchers argue that these lines indicate knowledge of advanced geometry and possibly even the use of precise measuring instruments. There is also the question of how these maps represented areas that had not officially been explored at the time of their creation. Some Portolan charts show details of the West African coast that would only be discovered decades later by Portuguese expeditions. This raises the possibility that undocumented explorations occurred much earlier than historical records indicate, or that ancient knowledge was being preserved and transmitted through generations of cartographers and navigators. Lost continents and controversial theories. The idea of lost continents has captured the human imagination for centuries, and some ancient maps seem to offer intriguing evidence for these theories. The most famous is Atlantis, described by Plato as an advanced civilization that sank into the ocean. Although no definitive maps show Atlantis, various cartographers throughout the centuries have attempted to pinpoint where it might have been, placing mysterious islands in the Atlantic that could be remnants of this lost continent. Another hypothetical continent is Lemuria, proposed in the 19th century to explain the distribution of lemur fossils between Madagascar and India. Some esoteric maps from the late 19th and early 20th centuries depicted Lemuria as a massive continent in the Indian Ocean. While modern science has explained these fossil distributions through plate tectonics, the idea of Lemuria remains popular in alternative circles. Mu, or Lemuria of the Pacific, is another proposed lost continent, supposedly located in the Pacific Ocean and home to an advanced civilization that disappeared thousands of years ago. Some researchers point to underwater ruins, such as the Yonaguni formations in Japan, as possible evidence of lost civilizations. The theory that continental configurations were drastically different in the past is not entirely without merit. We know that plate tectonics moved continents over millions of years, and that sea levels varied significantly during ice ages. During the last glacial maximum, about 20,000 years ago, sea levels were more than 100 meters lower than they are today, exposing vast areas of coastal land that are now submerged. This means that ancient civilizations could have lived on lands that are now underwater, and maps of these areas would have looked very different. Some controversial researchers argue that maps like those of Piri Reis and other ancient documents preserve knowledge from a prehistoric era when these lands were accessible and inhabited, the question of an ice-free Antarctica. One of the greatest mysteries of ancient cartography is how several maps show Antarctica seemingly free of ice, when the continent has been covered by massive layers of ice for thousands of years. The Piri Reis map is the most cited example, but it is not the only one. The Orientaeus Finnaeus map, created in 1531, shows Antarctica with geographical details that were only confirmed in the 20th century, including mountain ranges that lie beneath kilometers of ice. How could these cartographers have had this knowledge? One theory suggests that these maps were based on even older documents, possibly from a time when parts of Antarctica were actually ice-free. Geological studies indicate that Antarctica was not always completely frozen. There is evidence of warmer periods when at least parts of the continent had vegetation and a temperate climate, but this would have been millions of years ago, long before human existence as we understand conventional history. Some researchers propose an alternative explanation. Perhaps ancient civilizations had far more advanced navigation and exploration capabilities than we credit, allowing them to map these remote regions. Others suggest that the knowledge was preserved through oral traditions and lost documents from ancient cultures such as the Egyptians, Phoenicians, or even hypothetical pre-flood civilizations. Skeptics argue that the similarities between these ancient maps and the real Antarctic are exaggerated or coincidental. They point out that many medieval and Renaissance maps contained large amounts of speculation and fantasy, and that we are selecting only the details that seem correct while ignoring the numerous inaccuracies. However, even critics admit that some details are surprisingly accurate for the time. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. These maps may contain fragments of genuine knowledge mixed with speculation, error, and creative interpretation. What remains undeniable is that they continue to challenge our assumptions about what ancient civilizations knew about global geography. Nautical knowledge of ancient civilizations. When we examine the history of navigation, we discover that ancient civilizations were far more sophisticated in their maritime capabilities than we generally recognize. The Phoenicians, for example, were master navigators who circled the Mediterranean and possibly beyond, reaching as far as the west coast of Africa and perhaps even the British Isles. They developed celestial navigation techniques, using stars and constellations for orientation, and built robust vessels capable of ocean voyages. There are controversial theories suggesting that the Phoenicians may have crossed the Atlantic long before Columbus, although definitive evidence is difficult to find. The Polynesians accomplished one of the greatest feats of navigation in human history, colonizing islands scattered across vast stretches of the Pacific Ocean using only knowledge of the stars, currents, wave patterns, and bird behavior. They created complex mental maps and sometimes used stick maps, structures made of branches that represented currents and islands. This nautical sophistication existed without the technology we consider essential today. The Vikings were also exceptional navigators, reaching North America some 500 years before Columbus, establishing settlements in places like Vinland, now identified as part of Canada. They navigated using the position of the sun, stars, and possibly even special crystals that functioned as rudimentary compasses. Ancient civilizations like the Egyptians also had considerable nautical knowledge, although their voyages were primarily riverine and coastal. However, there is intriguing evidence of cultural and commercial contacts between distant civilizations that only makes sense if we assume more advanced navigational capabilities than we generally credit. Cocaine and nicotine have been found in Egyptian mummies, substances that only existed in the New World, suggesting some kind of transoceanic contact in antiquity, seemingly out-of-place artifacts, such as maps showing the Americas in documents that officially precede their discovery, continue to fuel theories of undocumented ancient explorations. The deliberate suppression of knowledge. A more controversial theory suggests that some maps and geographical knowledge were deliberately suppressed or altered for political, religious, or economic reasons. During the Age of Exploration, European powers such as Portugal and Spain kept their geographical discoveries in absolute secrecy to protect lucrative trade routes and territorial claims. Cartographers who revealed sensitive information could be severely punished, including with the death penalty. The Treaty of Tordesillas of 1494 divided the non-European world between Portugal and Spain, and both nations had a strong interest in controlling geographical information. Official maps were frequently altered to conceal the true location of resource-rich islands or to discourage other nations from exploring certain areas. There are historical records of false maps being deliberately created and disseminated to deceive rivals. The Catholic Church also exerted considerable influence over map production during the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. Representations that contradicted religious doctrines could be suppressed or altered. Maps depicting a world far larger than that described in Scripture, or including unknown lands that didn't fit the biblical narrative, could be problematic. Some researchers suggests that knowledge from pre-flood civilizations or ancient explorations that contradicted the accepted chronology of creation might have been deliberately erased or reinterpreted. The destruction of ancient libraries, such as the famous Library of Alexandria, resulted in the irreparable loss of geographical and historical knowledge. How many maps and documents were lost in these events? How often was knowledge intentionally destroyed by conquerors who wanted to erase the history of subjugated peoples? These questions suggest that our understanding of the history of cartography may have significant gaps not by accident, but by design. While some of these theories enter speculative territory, the basic fact remains: information is power, and throughout history, those in power have often controlled and manipulated geographical information for their own ends. Lost technology and forgotten knowledge. The idea that ancient civilizations possessed technologies or knowledge that were subsequently lost is supported by several historical examples. Roman concrete, for instance, was in some respects superior to modern concrete, especially in durability and water resistance, but the exact formula was lost after the fall of the Roman Empire and only recently rediscovered. Greek fire, an incendiary weapon used by the Byzantine Empire, had a chemical composition that remains mysterious to this day. If practical technologies like these could be lost, it is possible that cartographic knowledge was also forgotten and rediscovered multiple times throughout history. The ability to accurately calculate longitude was lost after antiquity and was only truly solved in the 18th century with the invention of precise marine chronometers. However, some ancient maps appear to show longitude accuracy that should not have been possible without these instruments. This suggests that perhaps alternative methods existed, now lost, or that knowledge was more advanced in certain periods than in others. Ancient libraries contained vast repositories of knowledge, and their destruction represented incalculable losses. The Library of Alexandria, the Library of Pergamon, and countless other centers of learning have been destroyed over the centuries by war, fire, or neglect. How many unique maps, travelogues, and geographical treatises have been lost forever? Oral traditions of indigenous cultures around the world preserve detailed geographical knowledge that sometimes contradicts or complements written records. Polynesian navigators, Australian Aborigines, and indigenous peoples of the Americas possessed sophisticated knowledge of geography, astronomy, and navigation that was often ignored or undervalued by European explorers. Only recently have we begun to recognize the validity and depth of this traditional knowledge. The possibility of cycles of civilization where societies advance, collapse, and have to rebuild knowledge from scratch is supported by archaeological evidence from various ancient cultures that mysteriously disappeared. If this happened repeatedly over tens of thousands of years, how much cumulative knowledge was lost and rediscovered? Ancient maps may be windows into these lost periods, preserving fragments of knowledge from earlier civilizations. What modern science reveals. Recent advances in technology are allowing scientists to test some claims about ancient maps with unprecedented accuracy. Satellites, ice-penetrating radar, and ocean floor mapping are revealing geographical features that were previously invisible. Surprisingly, some of these discoveries seem to validate certain aspects of ancient maps that were considered purely fantastical. Submarine geological formations in the shape of seemingly artificial structures have been found in various locations around the world, including near Japan, in the Caribbean, and in the Mediterranean. While debate continues about whether these formations are natural or man-made, they demonstrate that much of our planet's geography remains unexplored. During ice ages, when sea levels were significantly lower, vast areas of coastal land that are now submerged were above water. Mapping the ocean floor has revealed formations that resemble ancient rivers, valleys, and even possible settlements on these submerged continental shelves. If human civilizations lived in these areas before the sea level rise at the end of the last ice age, their maps would have shown very different geographies from our own. Geological analysis of Antarctica has confirmed that the continent has complex features beneath the ice, including mountain ranges, valleys, and even subglacial lakes. Some of these details show intriguing correspondences with representations on ancient maps. Although skeptics argue that the similarities are exaggerated, DNA studies and genetic analyses are revealing patterns of ancient human migration that sometimes challenge established theories. Evidence of contact between populations that were supposedly isolated from each other suggests that trade and travel networks were more extensive in prehistory than previously believed. These discoveries do not definitively prove that ancient maps preserve knowledge of lost advanced civilizations, but they demonstrate that our understanding of human history is still incomplete. Modern science is gradually filling gaps, but it is also creating new mysteries and questioning established narratives about when and how our ancestors explored and mapped the world. We've reached the end of this fascinating journey through the mysteries of ancient maps and lost continents. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to leave a like so that more people can discover these incredible enigmas. Subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss the next videos about historical mysteries and surprising discoveries. Oh, and take a look at the video that's appearing on your screen now. I'm sure you'll love it. Thank you for watching until the end, and see you in the next video.